Once I have the design cut out for the front and the back of my character, now I'm ready to go to that bag of scraps and start cutting out everything that I'm going to need to decorate my character. So you were given a bag of scrap felt, and the scrap felt is all different pieces of different colors and sizes for you to work with. And you're welcome to use anything that was in that bag. So you're gonna find the pieces that you want. If you have to substitute, a color because it didn't match up with your design, that might have to happen. But you're gonna find what you wanna use. I'm going to use some of this scrap pink that I have to create my flowers. I'm gonna use some of this bright green to make the thorns that I want for my character, and maybe even some brown. And the nice thing about this is that as you're working, you can cut out your designs, and if you don't like the color that you chose or the piece that you have, you can, scrap it, grab something else, and try something different. So I could see maybe if I wanted to have white thorns or tan color thorns, brown or green, and then based off of that, I could continue making my pieces. So kind of round up the pieces that you think you might need for the pieces that you're planning on cutting out and get ready to design. So after looking through the scrap that I had, I decided that I have more yellow than I have pink. So I'm probably going to make my flowers, little yellow flowers on my cactus. I'm going to use this bright green because I've got a bunch of it to make my thorns. And I have this bigger piece of brown scrap that I'm going to use to create the pot. So once you've gone through your colors and kind of figured out what you plan on using, then you're ready to start cutting out your designs. Now, when you cut out the designs for your character, if you're doing a small little piece that you think you can freehand, you're welcome to just cut the piece of felt and not make another template. So for the flowers and the thorns, because these don't necessarily all have to be exactly the same, I'm not going to worry about making a template for them. I'm just going to freehand cut those out. Something like the pot, though, is something that I don't want to just try and cut out of the felt without making a template first. You do not want to draw on your felt. So sometimes people take a marker or something and they use it to draw their shapes on their felt before they cut out. The problem with this is you can't erase felt. You can't erase it if it's pencil, if it's marker, whatever it is, it will be visible on your character when you're all done. When we sew with fabric, it's very common to turn your seams inside out so no one can see them. So when you're sewing, sometimes you'll see people draw on their fabric and then they sew their pieces together because they turn them inside out. When we sew with felt, we do not turn things inside out. So if you draw on your fabric, it will be there forever. And we don't want anybody to know that we used a template or how we got these shapes to appear. So if you need to draw them, you'll use some of your scrap paper, and you can use part of the outside from where you cut here or any scrap paper that you have lying around to cut out your shape. So if I wanted to do a pot for my character, I would simply take a piece of scrap paper and kind of sketch onto here what I want my pot to look like, my size here, so that when I go to cut it out, and I'm drawing nice and lightly so that if I decide the drawing isn't quite right, it's easy to fix. And as I kind of figure out my shape a little bit more, I can really darken that in. So I'm going to create a shape like so. And I'm going to erase this line. here because I'm just cutting out the outside piece. So if I was going to use this template, I would do just the same way I did for this. I would cut this out, pin it to my felt, and cut it out. It's very important to remember when you're creating your designs and extra pieces for your character, anything that you want to stuff. You're going to stuff the arms. For this one, I want to stuff the pot. If it's going to be stuffed, it has to have a front and a back because you have to be able to put the two pieces together in order to get the stuffing in. So when you do this, and I'm going to fold this in half and do another little cheat here. My sides aren't quite even. And I don't like it when they don't match, so I'm just going to fold this in half. Down my line of symmetry in the center. Now when I open it up, ta-da, my template is symmetrical. So to create my pot, let me just slide my stuff. Now, your workspace can very easily get overwhelming. So it's super important when you're working to make sure that you're keeping track of the pieces that you want to keep and the pieces that you're going to be cutting later. So I usually suggest to people to have some kind of bag or something that they're going to keep their pieces they're keeping so that you're not going to get those confused with the bag of stuff that you're cutting up. So I'm going to take my little cactus and slide him into my Ziploc so that I don't accidentally cut him while I'm working on the pot. And I'm just going to slide that over to the side. So I'm going to take this piece of scrap felt that I have here, and I'm going to see where I can fold this over. And when you're working with your felt, you always want to kind of try and cut out of the corners. You don't want to do something like this person did, where they cut all the way into the center to cut out a little circle, because if you needed a bigger block of the felt and you've cut through it, it makes it hard to find that big space that you need. So they could have very easily cut these two little dots out of the bottom corner here and then had this whole big pink piece to work with still. So when you're working with felt, and this one too, you can see this person cut all the way in here to cut this shape out. You want to try and use from the edge, not from the center. That'll allow you to have a bigger piece to use for something else later down the line. So I'm going to once again take my felt here, and I'm just going to cut out a small square around this shape that I plan on cutting out. Free that from the big piece. I'm going to put this back in my scrap pile. And I'm going to do just like I did before. I folded that in half so I have a front and a back. I'm going to line my template up on my piece here. I'm going to use my straight pins. And this design is kind of like one big blob, so I'm just going to use one pin to hold it. It's not going anywhere, so I don't have to worry about getting crazy with all my pins. And I'm going to very carefully cut out the design that I want to use for the front and the back of my pot. So I'll have two pot pieces that match. So when I go to put my cactus in later, I know that my front and my back seams are going to match up. All right. And then remove my pin, put it back into my cardboard so that I'm not stabbing myself later. I don't need this template anymore. If I'm worried that I might need to come back to it, I can add it to the Ziploc bag with my character and his pieces to wait for later. Now that I'm ready to start cutting out some more of the little designs, I want to keep my character handy so that I can use him as a guide for my pieces that I'm cutting out. So for my thorns that I'm going to be doing on here, all of my thorns are slightly different, so I'm not worried about using a template for those to make them all the same. If you wanted to have two of the same, you could do this simple fold. I'm going to cut this in half. So let's say I'm making a bunch of thorns and I want 2 to be identical, or I just want to speed up the process and make more. I've created a double stack of these tiny pieces, and I can just use my scissors to freehand my thorn shapes, and I've got 2 of them now. So felt is really nice because as you're working with it, you can kind of lay it down on the piece that you're using and they stick to each other. Now this is also something you have to watch out for because they will very easily stick to your sleeve, your bed covers, whatever you're working on top of, and make a big mess and get lost very easily. So I'm going to continue to cut out different thorns for my cactus design. And you want to cut out everything that you plan on using before you sew anything down. A lot of times when people are working, they ask, is it okay if I change my mind? I cut this out and I like it better, or I was trying to cut out this shape that I designed and it's really hard and I can't get it right. Can I change my idea? And the answer is yes. You just have to make sure that as you're revamping your design, that you're still following the rules. You're not getting rid of the design that's on the front or the back, because remember, you need to have both of those elements as part of your requirements. I'm going to make this one a little skinnier. I don't want them all to be too same. And I'm just going to keep on cutting out until I've got all the pieces and parts that I need. And don't forget that you also want to be designing for the back of your character as well. Now, here's something to keep in mind when you are working on your design. You do not want to take your character, because this is the front and this is the back. You don't want to take your character and slide the pieces side to side like this. So notice my bigger arm is on the left on both of my cactuses here. This is actually going to be on the inside of my character. So anything I put on this side, when I line these back up to sew them together, will be completely covered up. So when you pick up your pieces, you want to be really careful that once you've slid them out, you take one of them and you flip it over. So they should look like they can close together like a book, so that any designs that I put onto the character, and I'm just going to press this here. So I have my big arm on the left, big arm on the right. Once I go to put these together, I would take this one, flip it over, then put my pieces together, and then I would sew all the pieces on so that the front has my front designs and the back has the back designs visible and nothing is trapped inside the character. So as you're designing, especially if you're using it for measurement and trying to figure out what goes where, you will be designing with your character open like so that when you put them together, they match up. Now on my design here, I have 2 small circles made for the eyes and a little tiny smile made for the mouth. I've decided that I'm not going to cut out a piece of felt that's this small. Instead, I'm going to use my stitches when I start to sew it together to sew a mouth onto the face here. So when I'm going to cut out these eyes, before I told you that you could fold your piece of felt in half to cut 2 identical pieces. Sometimes if you're trying to cut things that are really small, folding your felt in half and cutting them out really just won't work. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to start with 2 squares that are the same size as each other and slightly bigger than the circles that I want for my tiny little eyeballs. And I'm just going to round off the corners on these one at a time. They might not be exactly perfect, but our characters are handmade, not machine made. So there is always that room for a little bit of difference. So I'm just kind of cutting around here. Got my one little circle. Now I'm going to do the same with my other. Very careful not to cut my fingers. And if you don't like one of them, you can try again with another little piece of scrap. That's the nice thing about not having these permanently attached to your character yet. All right, I'm going to cut this one a little bit more on this side. And there we go. I'm happy with those two shapes, so those are the ones I'm going to keep.